Hello and welcome to another episode of the Safe Schools Rainbow Roundtable. I'm your host, Dr. Dan Sheridan. This is one of America's most important television programs that explores the LGBTQ+ experience for our students and youth, educators, and families. Our mission is to educate our communities on some of the biggest issues our queer youth face. Today, we delve into a theme that holds immense significance in our educational landscape, LGBTQ+ History Month, celebrated every October. We have an incredible panel with us today, each bringing their unique perspective and expertise on the topic. They'll be sharing insights on why it's crucial for students to learn about LGBTQ+ heroes and the importance of seeing themselves reflected in history. But before we hear from them, let's set the stage. In examining LGBTQ+ history and its impact on today's education, we will have an historical overview that will take us on a journey through time. LGBTQ+ History Month is not just a month. It's a testament to the resilience, struggles, and triumphs of a community that has often been marginalized. Throughout history, there have been key events, landmark decisions, and influential figures that have shaped the narrative of LGBTQ+ rights and representation. Today, we'll journey through some of these pivotal moments to understand the roots of this commemorative month and its relevance in our schools. We will consider real-life experiences. History is not just about dates and events. It's about the people who lived through those times, their stories, their challenges, and their victories. In this segment, we'll hear real-life experiences that highlight the profound impact of LGBTQ+ History Month. From students who found solace in learning about LGBTQ+ heroes, to teachers who've witnessed the transformative power of inclusive education. These stories will shed light on why it's essential to recognize and celebrate this month. As we transition to our discussion on tools and resources available, remember that knowledge is power. With the right tools and resources, we can ensure that every student feels seen and valued. In this segment, we'll explore the myriad of tools, strategies, and educational materials available for educators and students alike. Whether you're a teacher looking to diversify your curriculum, or a student seeking resources to understand your identity better, this segment aims to empower you with actionable knowledge. And lastly, we'll gaze into the horizon with our Future Outlook segment. As we look to the future, it's essential to recognize the strides we've made and the challenges that lie ahead. What does the future hold for LGBTQ+ History Month? How can we, as a collective educational community, ensure that the stories of LGBTQ+ heroes continue to inspire and resonate with future generations? Our panelists will share their insights on these questions and more, providing a roadmap for a more inclusive and understanding future. We thank you for joining us on this enlightening journey today. Before we dive deeper into our discussions, we have an amazing group of panelists to discuss our LGBTQ+ history and its impact on today's education. To help us with the history of LGBTQ+, this is Steve Rothaus. This award-winning journalist for the Miami Herald is a recipient of the NLGJA, the Association of LGBTQ+ Journalists Hall of Fame Award. Welcome, Steve. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much. It's kind of interesting to me that when I started covering LGBTQ+ issues back in 1997, I didn't think of it at the time as chronicling our history. I mean, I was just covering stories on a daily basis, but then suddenly people in the community began to say, you're telling our stories and, you're keeping our history. And all these years later, I look at my work and I see going back to 1997, 98, and moments in history of our history. I started because Johnny Versace was murdered in Miami Beach in 1997, and nobody in Miami could cover the LGBTQ community that was so involved in the story. And so that's a moment in history. Mm-hmm. And then within a year, the loss of Matthew Shepard, and writing about what young people here thought about that. And then you take it right through to marriage in 2013, 2014, 2015, and these are all moments in our history that, it's there, it's kept, it's in an archive, you can go to the library and read these stories, but my concern is that, people don't remember, that they don't really know, or they were born afterwards.
Sure. We look forward to hearing what you have to say today. Thank you,
Thanks.
Steve. To help us with the digital and pop culture understanding of LGBTQ plus history, this is Tiffany Williams, a popular digital influencer and host of Tiffany Explains It All. Welcome, Tiffany.
Thank you for having me here. I think it's really interesting to be kind of like the social media guru, so to say, because a lot of my audience is usually younger generation, teenagers, even some young adults, and occasionally, some adults that are young at heart, And I think the most important thing is to have some representation for the LGBTQ plus students, because there's a lot more of them than people like to point out. So, and their matters are so important, and just being able to be the voice for them is such an amazing experience to be doing.
Absolutely. We'll hear a little bit more about Tiffany Explains It All later.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And to help us with this academic perspective on the intersection of LGBTQ plus history and education, this is Dr. Gisela Vega, the director of the University of Miami LGBTQ plus Student Center, one of America's most important university programs for LGBTQ plus students. Welcome, Dr. Vega.
Thank you, Dan. It's really great to be here. The center is part of the university, and we have actually one of the only LGBTQ minors that you'll find in Florida. I think something that's really interesting is about our queer theory. Queer theory is a camp of research and study,
Yes.
and it's been around for a long time. And folks think our history has just started, but the reality is our history has been around forever. And our very first program, I think, started back in 1971. Mm-hmm. So, there's definitely a long legacy there that we hope isn't forgotten and that people can learn more about.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Vega.
Sure.
And to help us with the student perspective on LGBTQ plus history and how it interacts in classrooms and on student campuses, this is Artemis Cruz, a student in Miami-Dade County Public Schools. Welcome, Artemis.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to talk and learn about professional perspective and everything. Thank you.
Thank you. And we look forward to hearing the student perspective too.
Thank you.
And to help us with the organization efforts going on over LGBTQ plus history and how it affects education, this is Harold Marrero, Chief Operating Officer of Safe Schools. Welcome, Harold.
Thank you for having me. And everybody here is sharing a great perspective. Queer history is something that is often not really spoken about, or when it's spoken about is concentrated just to recent history. And there's so much more that can be explored across not just the West, but across the entire globe. And we're trying to do that at Safe Schools. We've just launched a new program called Queer History 101, where we do these short videos and we just expand on different perspective on queer history. And we plan to expand that throughout the years. So this is right on topic for us.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining us. So thank you for setting the stage with us. As we delve deeper into our theme, let's journey back in time and explore the historical context that has shaped today's LGBTQ plus landscape. Let's consider the historical overview. As we embark on a historical overview, it's essential to understand the roots and significance of LGBTQ plus History Month. This month-long celebration is not just a nod to the past, but a testament to the resilience, struggles, and triumphs of the diverse and beautiful lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer communities. The inception of LGBTQ plus History Month can be traced back to 1994, thanks to Rodney Wilson, a history teacher from Missouri. Recognizing the importance of highlighting the LGBTQ plus community's history and civil rights movements, Rodney took the initiative to create this observance. By the following year, the National Education Association's General Assembly had added LGBTQ plus History Month to its list of commemorative months. But why October? Well, October was chosen for its significance in the LGBTQ plus community. National Coming Out Day was already observed on October 11th, and the first March for Gay Rights in Washington took place on October 14th, 1979. As the years have passed, the month has grown to encompass more than just history. It now includes Ally Week, a time where students are encouraged to stand in solidarity with their LGBTQ plus peers and combat bullying. Spirit Day, observed on October 20th, sees people donning the color purple in a show of support for LGBTQ+ youth. And we also remember Matthew Shepard, a young man whose life was tragically cut short in a hate crime on October 12, 1998. The beauty of the LGBTQ+ History Month is that it offers a chance to delve deep into the movement's history, understanding the factors that have been successful in building communities and spotlighting role models who best represent and address the issues of the LGBTQ+ community. While most prominently celebrated in countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Hungary, Brazil, and the city of Berlin, the month observance varies. For instance, while we celebrate in October here in the US, our friends in the UK and Hungary observe it in February. Berlin, on the other hand, celebrates Queer History Month in June. Panelists, considering the rich tapestry of events and figures that have shaped the LGBTQ+ movement, what do you believe is the most pivotal moment or figure in LGBTQ+ history that has had a lasting impact on today's generation?
Well, I when I saw this question, I thought about it, and it's, to me, something that I can't answer specifically with one person or one event, because for each generation, they have an event or a person or people who they relate to and remember, and it moved them. And, this is not just LGBTQ history, but this is, most history, how perhaps 9/11 moved a generation, and perhaps a generation before was Challenger, the explosion. Or generations before that, it may have been the Vietnam War or the Kennedy assassination. You keep going back and you talk to, now to the people who are gone, and we spoke about what moved them, and it was Pearl Harbor. Mm-hmm. So, there are moments in our history that I see that affect us all, and that they affect generations after generation. But, how you compare a Matthew Shepard to, marriage equality. I mean, it's just, or, a Jazz Jennings and what jazz has been able to do in our community. They're all important, and they take particular significance to certain individuals. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And, that we need to be able to broaden and reach, people. First, remind them of what is important to them, but then educate them about what they should also know.
Yeah, that's a very great perspective, and I also think that the question was open-ended in this terms of people share their person, or people that has made an impact to them when it comes to history. And as I was thinking about it, I'm very happy that the academics and educators have gone into the history, have gone back in time and tried to pluck the different LGBTQ or queer voices that existed. Because for me personally, and I've had this for a long time, my queer heroes are Saint Sergius and Bacchus, and they're celebrated in the Greek Orthodox Church, and there are two Christian martyrs who were killed by Rome, and they were an example of the first same-sex couple that is celebrated as saints. And there were two guys that were in the military, and I just love their story. So for me, my queer heroes are from the Roman Empire and from the early church movement that emerged during that time, during the 1st and 2nd century. And that's just my perspective, and then what I've seen is that history tends to go silent all the way up to the 1900s. And then you have some people in the 1800s, but it's mainly in the 1900s, and then in recent histories when we have all this explosion of queer history, but we have existed throughout the entire time that humanity has even, picked up a tool and started writing.
You bring up a good point, Harold. The history didn't start, in the 1900s. And unfortunately, I think in this country, we think it started with Stonewall, and we know that there were many movements before then. The first LGBT organization that came together, in our history was actually in 1924. So there's definitely a lot of history This is why it's important for us to be able to share that history, because if not, it's forgotten. But historically, there have been figures throughout time. You know, we can go back to the island of Lesbos and talk about Sappho, who was a Greek writer, a female writer, who much of her writings were destroyed because she wrote about love between women. So I think, yes, there's a lot of different icons throughout time, and there's a lot of history, and unfortunately, a lot of it is either, you know, not spoken, not shared, or forgotten.
I definitely want to like just pivot off of what all you've been saying, because I definitely agree with you with your opening statement. That's like, the question is almost kind of like where do you even start? Like, there's just so many different people, and like the LGBTQ plus is like, there's so much of us, and we're all different segments. So it's like, there's so many different people in history. And yes, I do agree. I think a lot of younger generation right now, when they think about queer history, they think about the Stonewall riots, you know, and I think they don't know enough to know that there was more beyond that. Again, I've seen photographs from like the 1920s and I think the 1910s of men being with men and women being with women. I'm sorry, but nobody talked about it. That's the thing. And when you find those little like tidbits, those little like pieces of like history, and that's essentially what it is. It's history. I think it's so beautiful, because then you're like, oh wow, so this has been going on since the beginning of time, since man was able to do things, you know. And even when you were talking about Sappho, which we get sapphic poetry is women on women love. And I think that's something that like not a lot of people would know that. And especially, it's so interesting. It's like something that's been around since time itself. And then that there was just at one point that all of a sudden people were like, well, this is too much. This is too progressive. This is, we need to not talk about this. This is too much. And so it's like, but then you have all these new generations that they feel kind of conflicted with their queerness. Because then they're like, maybe there's something wrong with me. It's like, no, like what you're experiencing is just normal.
Yeah.
So I think we're starting to get to that point of like, it's okay to be queer. Like, you are just the way you are supposed to be, and there's nothing wrong with that. So,
You know,
Sorry, I was just going to share something that I think is really interesting is when we talk about Stonewall, we talk about the intersections of our community and how it showed up at Stonewall, not realizing that we had a whole community during the Harlem Renaissance in the 20s and 30s that really highlighted our Black community and was really recognized and acknowledged, and people were respected for the music they chose to write and the people they chose to love. So it's an interesting observation.
Thank you.
And going back a little bit, a bit back in history, it is also known that before the arrival of Columbus in America, within indigenous communities all around the Americas, queer people were celebrated. It would be good luck to have a queer person in your life. And I've heard it a lot, is that the heteronormative is a colonial construct, which it is, it really is, because you see a lot of cultures that throughout history, not only in America, have celebrated queer people in general.
Yeah. And that extends also to the impact of colonialism in the world is that Christianity became the lens which colonialism was in place on top of these cultures. And in many Asian countries that had contact with colonialism, the Catholic Church at that time, or the Roman Catholic Church at that time, tried heavily to erase the same gender love that existed in some of these Asian communities, and these Asian cultures. And there, you talked about that it was too progressive, so people try to erase it. It's like, no, people intentionally went in there and tried to censor, tried to erase us from history to fit a single perspective, which that is that heteronormative perspective that was for some. I mean, there are many reasons, but for some reason it was pushed by the colonial powers that started to spread across the world during that time.
Isn't that what's happening right now here in places like Florida? The erasure of people, the telling students you can't read these books. There's so much information, and to tell teachers that they can't speak about, who their loved ones are, and the only way that the state knew how to deal with that was to just say, we can't talk about it, and you won't talk about it, and it will go away.
Yeah.
But that's exactly the reaction. It's the same pushback that, we're just, we know it's out there, and what else can we do? But the fact is that we have, the genie's already out of the bottle.
Right.
And there are other ways of getting information, not just in a classroom. And so people will have that information.
Yeah.
And all they've done is just, infuriated other people to say, what do you mean we can't read these books? What do you mean we can't talk about these things? And why? Because they think it's going to stop this change among younger people who, you talk about it being normal and being okay. And that is why there's this panic. And that's what this is. It's panic,
right.
On the far right, because they don't know any other way to try and stop it.
Yeah.
And history repeats itself because we can go back to Nazi Germany when there was the Sexuality Institute in Germany, which the first thing that Hitler did when he got power was he went and he destroyed every bit of research and book and the institute itself.
Yeah. Sure.
Again, pulling back historically, progress that had been made.
Yeah. They burned the books. They did a good old-fashioned book burning.
Right. Yeah.
That's why, I always challenge people to find. I ask them, please find me an instance in history where the good people were burning books. I want to see that.
And it never works.
Never works.
What don't they understand? It never works. They've done the book burnings, and we know our history, and it's still documented.
Yeah, and you can't do that anymore with the internet. You can't. You have to destroy all these servers, and then people will still have access to the information. It's not going to happen. Yeah.
But I'm wondering also if we're currently in a place in time where we're watching history develop, LGBTQ plus history. When I think about Pete Buttigieg and the potential of him being president, if you all have thoughts about that, and where you see him.
Yeah, it's funny because of the advent of the internet and the spread of information, it does feel like queer history started in Stonewall, and that is what a lot of people focus on. It's like, oh, Stonewall, and then everything else. You have, then you have the AIDS epidemic. Then you have a lot of the protests that happened. Then you have the pride parades. Then you have, trying to change legislation. Then you have marriage equality. And then you get to where we are today, and that is a chunk that really people focus on a lot, but they're missing out on so much. And I do think that because our community mobilized and a lot of changes in history happened through traumatic events, and I do think that the AIDS pandemic, that was a trauma for our community. That was a shock to our community, and that really, I feel that pushed us out into the world where we should stop caring. And we're like, we're not going to be mistreated. We're dying. A whole generation is dying. This is not okay. Let's just go out there and be us and show ourselves authentically in the world. And come hell or high water, we're doing this. And I think because of that, we are seeing that queer history is not only happening, but it's developing every day in this country and in the West and across the world. And with more access to information that we have, being able to see what's happening across the globe, we will see more and more queer history moments happen almost yearly. And that's great.
It's history.
Yeah.
And history is ongoing, and these are each blips in history. Buttigieg is a blip, as was Matthew Shepard, unfortunately, a blip. Edie Windsor, exactly. These are, now some of these blips resonate louder than others, but that's what they all are. And history is ongoing. And I was just thinking about, well, why is Stonewall the starting point for so many people in history? And from my perspective, I think perhaps because that's when the documentation started. When journalists, when the New York Times began to cover our community. And, if you go to the Stonewall Museum here in Fort Lauderdale, and they have on the wall the pages from the New York Times of the first 3 stories of Stonewall. And the first story, the first day, was deep inside page 33 or 34. And then the next day, there was another story. And then on the third day, there was a front page story. But, so it kind of makes sense. Well, they didn't talk about these things anywhere. The evening news didn't talk about LGBT, people, let alone history.
Right.
And, when the times when we were actually in the newspapers, we were called perverts.
Exactly.
It was because they rounded up a group of men in a park and they arrested them.
Yeah.
And that was our history, in terms of how our lives were documented.
Yeah.
But that changed in '69 during Stonewall.
Or in previous protests, we were just deviants causing trouble.
Yeah.
It wasn't. No one ever focused on the protest and why the protest happened. It's just, these perverts causing issues.
Because
these perverts are
That was
protesting.
the headline word.
Yes.
Perverts.
Yes.
Because you're going against the grain. You're the one standing up for the oppressed. So that's why everyone thinks that everyone that's following the law thinks it's like, well, everything's going right. Like, what do you mean? Like, there are people that are oppressed. It's like, yes, there are people oppressed that don't look like you, and their voices matter.
Yeah.
And that's what we're bringing up to more present times that's been around forever.
I think the important thing is, history is his story, someone's story, whose story is being told, how it's being told, how it's being documented.
Right.
And
Yeah.
Steve brings up a good point that Stonewall is in the books. It's been recorded, it's been researched, it was documented by journalists. But there was also one other thing. It was the first time that our community came together fully as a group to protest, to stand up. So I think it's like the perfect storm to create history,
Right.
because you have to have different elements for history to happen, and that allowed that to happen.
Right. And people came out. And, you can't demonize as easily people who you see sitting across the table.
Right.
It's easy to demonize an invisible group of people.
But it really highlights the concept that history is written by those in power, and it really speaks to the need for representation of LGBTQ plus individuals to be at the forefront and to work in numbers, to work together. But we have to move on from this topic. So the tapestry of history is rich and diverse, and understanding it is key to shaping our present. Safe Schools has one of the most dynamic video integration strategies in America to combat what we're watching in Florida. These programs are educational and entertaining for educators, students, and parents. Today's Rainbow Roundtable is just one example. Another example is our popular and fun weekly program, Tiffany Explains It All.
Welcome to Tiffany Explains It All, the ultimate destination for all things pop culture. I'm your host, Tiffany. I'm here to spill the tea, serve some sass, and keep you on the loop on the latest LGBTQ plus entertainment, anime, movies, and so much more. Every week, we'll dive into the stories that matter to you, exploring the hidden gems of the world of entertainment, and celebrating the incredible diversity and creativity of our community, from the hottest new anime releases to the fiercest queer icons and movies that make you go, "Yas, queen!" We've got you covered. So buckle up, my fabulous friends, as we embark on a glittery journey to discover, discuss, and dissect the most intriguing and captivating aspects of queer pop culture. This is Tiffany Explains It All, your one-stop shop to get the 411 on everything fabulous and fierce. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Let's get started.
So we're lucky here to have Tiffany from Tiffany Explains It All. Tiffany, you want to tell us a little bit more about your show and what it offers viewers?
Well, I think what I would like to say, or like how I like to describe it, I bring the fun in the LGBTQ plus, and talking about different subject matters that everybody in the community also enjoys. Who doesn't like watching a good movie? Our favorite TV shows that we grew up watching, and talking about right now, we're doing Queer History 101, and which we're diving into a lot of topics and different figures in history right now. And what's interesting also, I have a co-host, Eddie, with the Tea with Eddie, and how I like to describe the two of us, because we're definitely two different beings. I like to say that mine is like that fun, like very light conversational, like, hey, did you know like this random fact? It's like, I didn't know that. And with Eddie, it's like more of like that deep dive, that real like history buff. That's like, oh, you want a deeper, like detailed explanation. Well, I got you. You know.
Yeah.
Also, I'm a very colorful person, so you know, I think that also brings people into the conversation. They're like, oh, I like her makeup, or I like that fashion choice. You know.
But the real question I think viewers want to know is, Tiffany explains it all, the tea with Eddie. Which one's better?
Ooh, talk about hotspot. I'm gonna say both. Maybe I'm just biased. I think we just bring both really different aspects, and I think both of them are just as equally as important.
Yeah.
Sure. And Artemis, have you watched the Tiffany Explains It All?
I think I watched the anime video, and I loved it. And I know Harold told me we were gonna do an episode on Evangelion, so I'm waiting.
Yes, we're going to do an episode of Evangelion. We are.
And how do you think Tiffany Explains It All helps LGBTQ plus youth?
It kind of like, okay, in the anime video, right, you mentioned Sailor Moon.
Yeah.
And how there are like queer bits in it. So I think it helps like queer youth like feel seen in media that they see. And like, basically that it helps you feel seen in popular media.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Tiffany, for joining us.
Well, thank you.
So next, let's hear from those who've lived these experiences firsthand. In examining LGBTQ plus history and its impact on today's education, let's look at real-life experiences. As we delve into our real-life experiences of examining LGBTQ plus history and its impact on today's education, it's essential to recognize the profound impact on history education. History is not just a recounting of past events. It's an exploration of triumphs, failures, cultures, and most importantly, self-identity. Imagine being a young queer student, eagerly searching through the annals of history, hoping to find a reflection of yourself, only to be met with a void. This absence can be deeply unsettling. When queer students don't see themselves in history, it can lead to feelings of isolation, as if they're anomalies without a past. For instance, consider Jamie, a transgender student who, without exposure to historical transgender figures, felt like an outsider in her own community. The lack of representation made her question her identity and worth. On the other hand, when history education is inclusive, it can be transformative. Take Alex, a young gay student who learned about the contributions of figures like James Baldwin and Alan Turing. Discovering these stories gave Alex a sense of belonging and pride, knowing that people like him have always existed and have made significant contributions to society. The erasure of LGBTQ plus figures from history is not just an oversight, it's a disservice. When we omit these stories, we inadvertently perpetuate myths. Myths that queer people only began to exist in recent history, perhaps emerging during the Stonewall era, as if they hadn't lived, loved, and resisted before. This skewed representation has real-world consequences. Today, trans and intersex kids are facing legislative challenges that treat them as anomalies, questioning their right to public spaces and sports participation. But the truth is, queer people have always been here. They've thrived in every culture, every era. Their stories are woven into the fabric of our global history. And it's crucial for both educators and students to recognize this, because, as we know, precedent is power. So panelists, can you share instances from your experiences where inclusive history education made a difference, or the lack of it posed challenges?
I will say that as I was coming out, when I was 21, I looked for programming and documentaries and movies to try to understand queer history. And during that time, it was very, not disheartening, but very single-minded, I think, that the only thing I could find was HIV-related things, AIDS-related things, so the AIDS epidemic, and movies that were all about how awful it is to be gay, to come out, like all the bad things that happen to you. I remember that I just come out and I was watching Prayers for Bobby, and I would just like cry and just sob because it just, the pain felt so real. But what I was really seeking, and as I did some introspection, I think to myself, like, what I was really seeking were stories of positivity, stories that did not end with someone getting HIV and dying, or somebody having, dying by suicide, or somebody being rejected, or somebody being kicked out, even though that is the reality for many people, including myself, my family. I just wanted hope, and I didn't find hope back then. I'm glad that it exists now, and that people saw there was a need for this, that there was a need to create more inclusive and a broader perspective of what it means to be queer. But that was something that I was missing back then.
I think that we pay a lot of attention to famous people as people who make history. And I don't get a chance to do this very often, but there's somebody on this panel who I believe has played a very important role in the lives of many, many people, and that's Dr. Vega. When I began covering LGBT in 1997, or less than a year later, I went to FIU where Dr. Vega worked at the time, and she basically was the faculty advisor for the Stonewall Student Union. And we met, and she said, come and meet these kids. And I thought, okay, great. I'm going to go to FIU and write a story about the Stonewall Student Union. And, this came to mind the other day when I was thinking about moments in my own life where I felt like it was making a difference. Well, back at FIU at the campus down in Sweetwater, I lived in North Miami Beach, in the northeast part. And my partner at the time, I said, come with me because we'll have dinner this way. Otherwise, we wouldn't have dinner because it was about 6 o'clock, this meeting. So he joined me, and we were together about 14 years at the time. We're now going on 39. But Rick and I were there at the table, sitting around a table like this with all the students, and we had to introduce each other. And so I introduced myself, and I said, this is my partner of 14 years, Rick Katz. And suddenly, all of the young people began to applaud. It was spontaneous applause. And suddenly I knew what my story was going to be. And when I interviewed the students, and they said to me, we've never met people, couples, who were together that long, 14 years. It was so meaningful to so many of them. And the fact that we could even do this, and that's where, coming back to Dr. Vega, she played an important role in the lives of so many students. I mean, I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of students you've had. But, we come from families where they teach you your family history.
Right.
And they teach you about your history as Jews or as people of color, black people, Cubans. I mean, they teach you your history. But queer people don't have that, handed to them.
Yeah.
Nobody's teaching them about what came before you and why you're normal and why you have to fight for certain things because they're not going to be given to you. And that became the responsibility of our community.
Yeah.
And I can't think of anybody who has done a better job than Dr. Vega in being able to help make these students feel good about themselves and be able to, take their lives to the next level.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned Dr. Vega, because after I came out when I was 21, and after sobbing myself with prayers for Bobby, I started attending a church where I met Dr. Vega. And it's so true that we don't, as queer kids, I mean, I was a queer young adult coming out, I had nothing. And my own family had disowned me. And Dr. Vega became a chosen family member for me at this church. And the example that I saw with you, Dr. Vega, as an adult living their best authentic life, really gave me that hope that I was seeking. So it's that connection, it's that the ability for us to create chosen families, and then that's how we make our own history, that's how we make our own queer connections. That's what really saved me, because I was in a very dark place when I came out. And you remember, I was like this 20-year-old, just like
I remember very well.
walking around life, just stumbling. And Dr. Vega really took me under her wing and really started also my academic career. So I am eternally grateful to Dr. Vega.
A lot of influence.
Thank you to my found family. And both of you are talking about something that's really important. And we talk about how knowledge is power. But power without purpose and action is useless.
Yes.
I believe our history has to be passed down from generation to generation. And our students who don't know it obviously need a place, a safe space to find it. And the work that I've committed myself to and the work that my fellow faculty, peers, colleagues do is to not only impart that knowledge, but to do so in impactful ways. I think one of the best ways that we can really share our history and to help our young people is by engaging our communities together to learn from one another. We haven't done a good job of that in the past. And I think for myself as an educator, it's important to create spaces where generations can come together and share that history, but also learn from each other about our current history and what's to come.
I think it brings up a very good point to Steve and Harold's comments about you, Dr. Vega, that we often look at LGBTQ plus history at the macro level, country, the world, but also history is made in local communities. And there's certain figures that resonate with us, that will stay with us, that will be passed down in story and that stick with you as a local community member. So thank you for your contribution to the South Florida community.
You're welcome.
But it raises another question for me about how you all think the impact of Don't Say Gay affects safe spaces, the ability to talk about history, to pass it down to younger generations.
I could talk a little bit about that. Besides being a social media guru, I'm also the director of outreach for Safe Schools South Florida. And so I'm actually talking to these kids and their teachers. And I actually recently had a teacher tell me, they're like, I love that you guys at Safe Schools are making a queer history program because we're not allowed to talk about it, Mm-hmm. But they were also giving me their concerns of they're scared. They're scared of, putting themselves out there because they are part of the community, and also the fact that their license could be on the line if they do talk about it, And I'm like, I know that you're in a tough situation, and I know how scary that must be, but there's so many young people that need this, that they want this, and especially I have kids that they've asked me. I had a student who was transgender and autistic, and they asked me, they're like, oh, do you have any resources on being queer and being, neurodivergent? And I was like, you know what? I don't have that, but you know what? That's a great conversational piece. And I want to get a hold of people in that community and be like, hey, look, I can't speak for you, but if you could speak to these kids, give them some light, some guidance of, they're going to be okay, that they can be two things at the same time. That's still true to who they are. And I mean, talking about a little bit earlier about, you just being with your partner for 14 years and how the students applaud. That still happens even now, because like what Harold had said earlier, we see a lot of negative lighting in the LGBTQ plus, especially like in media. You see some stereotypes of, the AIDS pandemic, or that if you're a gay person, you're most likely not someone who likes to commit. You want to play around. But that's not true. There are people who want families, that want commitment, and we're allowed to have that too.
We're like everyone else.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, we are everyone else. We are everyone. Mm-hmm. And that's why we can't be marginalized so easily, because we come from everywhere. Mm-hmm. And every family. I remember interviewing the mayor of Miami at the time, Tomas Regalado, and we were talking about LGBT people, and his responses, and this was probably around 2014 or so, and his was no problem. He said every family has one. But what he was saying, even though it sounds funny to hear it said that way, means that something, we're everywhere, and we can't continue to deny that we're everywhere.
Right.
From every family and every ethnicity and every religious group. We've always been there.
Artemis, do you have anything to say about this?
Okay, as a student and as a young person, a few years ago in like 8th grade, I started questioning, and for me, the world felt like I was alone, and it's a lack of visibility because I didn't know queer people, or I didn't know history, so I struggled a lot with accepting myself. But then I started learning like on my own about the history, and I was like, okay, so this has been happening for a long time. People do this, have been like this, and it's normal. So I think that the Don't Say Gay bill is gonna alienate a lot of students from communities and from accepting themselves in a sense, and also erasing history, which is gonna just be catastrophic for the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and study after study has shown that the kids that don't get positive examples of the kid don't see themselves in our textbooks in history, and to have higher levels of anxiety, of depression, of not being seen. And I think this goes back to what I was saying when I first came out, that the way that I was reading and seeing the world was that I was gonna die. Like, there was very little hope for me coming out. And even the things that I got from people that were very mean and aggressive towards me is that I had this pastor tell me that because I came out, I was going to die before the age of 30, just because. And that was devastating. I remember I went home and I just like sobbed again, because I was like, someone was trying to read my future and didn't see a future for me past 30, all because I had the audacity to say who I was and not hide anymore. Mm-hmm. And that was, I struggled a lot with that. That was part of a major depressive episode of my life.
When we look at the development of our young LGBTQ people, there are 3 things that impact that more than anything else. It's your family, it's your peer group, and your community. Well, if your family is not accepting, you can imagine that has a negative effect. If your peers don't accept you, obviously that has a negative effect in community. So we know that a lot of our youth aren't getting that support at home. So this is where us as community and our peers can really help us sort of find our place and help us develop. So this is part of the reason why history is so critical. Again, not just the knowledge of the power of having that, but putting that power into action, which is the community piece.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and helping us to write our own history moving
Exactly.
forward.
Yeah.
So moving on, these personal stories truly underscore the importance of our topic today. Knowledge is power. Next, in looking at LGBTQ+ history and its impact on today's education, let's explore the tools and resources available to students and educators alike. Our Tools and Resources segment today delves into the importance of representation and the power dynamics that shape our historical narratives. It's often said that history is written by the victors, but in many cases it's penned by those with the power to decide which stories are worth telling and which are left in the shadows. Books, documentaries, and other resources can help illuminate some of these stories, but there are still vast periods and cultures that remain underrepresented or even completely absent. This isn't to say that we're devoid of resources, but rather that we must be more proactive and discerning in seeking them out. For educators, it's crucial to highlight the exceptions to these erasures. From ancient cave paintings to the rich tapestry of indigenous cultures, queer individuals have always been a part of our shared human experience. By emphasizing these stories, we challenge the myth that the LGBTQ+ community struggles and triumphs are a recent phenomenon. As historian Susan K. Freeman insightfully mentioned, understanding this history empowers marginalized individuals, reminding them that their current challenges are not a result of inherent inferiority, but rather man-made power dynamics. For instance, an educator might introduce their students to a book like Robert Jones Jr.'s The Prophets, which paints a vivid picture of same-sex love among enslaved Black individuals. By understanding the broader context, students can grasp why such stories have been obscured over time. Parents and students can also play a role in this journey of discovery. By visiting platforms like the Safe Schools website, they can access a wealth of content that sheds light on the LGBTQ+ community's rich history. Such resources not only educate, but also inspire, reminding everyone that queer individuals have always been here, shaping the world in myriad ways. However, it's also essential to approach this history with nuance. While umbrella terms like LGBTQIA are useful, they're rooted in contemporary language and might not capture the full spectrum of gender and sexual identities throughout history. It's crucial to respect the identities and descriptors that individuals and cultures have chosen for themselves. So panelists, given the vastness of history and the challenges of representation, how can educators, parents, and students collaborate to ensure a more inclusive and accurate portrayal of LGBTQ+ history?
You know, it was that question that led us to create the Queer History 101 videos and content for Safe Schools, because I always saw that we always focus on Marsha P. Johnson, Harvey Milk, Stonewall riots, and that we cover that, and that is very much covered, and everybody knows it. But I wanted to introduce students to a much broader understanding of LGBTQ+ history, including Silvia Rivera, including Federico Garcia Lorca, which was a Spanish poet who was killed by the Spanish authorities in the 1930s because he was gay, to the Harlem Renaissance. We have a whole video dedicated to the Harlem Renaissance. And that's to me is very important because it does show a much broader understanding of our history. And it brings in moments in our history that aren't spoken about because they tend to be by people of color, by the Hispanic community, by other marginalized communities that don't get as much attention as what happened with, lately with marriage equality and with all the other things that have happened in our history. So that's something that we were intentional about, that we really tried to focus on, and making it available for students and parents so they can teach themselves. And that's a way that we're also trying to help teachers, in that you may not be able to talk about this, but we can. As a nonprofit, we can do it. We have the resources, we have the minds that can get together and put all this together. And we ask our community partners, what do you want to see? What do you want us to do? How can we help you create more content for your community that you might not be able to access, but you can point students in the right direction or point parents in the right direction?
I think one of the things that's really important is, how do we get our information, our content into the hands or into, the teachers, the schools, the parents, because there's always, I'm going to say this, and some people may disagree, but we've always had content out there. It's just a matter of how do we find it. I'll give one quick example. When Coming Out Day started 2 years after that, the NEA, along with the task force and another group, developed this LGBThistory.com page, which really maintains history of our icons every October. They've been doing that since '96. What they do is they highlight an icon for every day. That's available. That's a resource. Students, anybody can go in there and learn about our history. CLAGS, which is the Center for Lesbian and Gay Studies out of CUNY, holds a lot of research and information. I think that's another way. We have for colleges and universities, there's the Pride Index that comes out of Campus Pride. It tells you what schools are receptive, who has programs. Right now, there's about 20 programs, LGBT or queer study programs at different universities across the nation. How do we get this information to people and let them know that it's there and there's resources available? I think that's the hard part, is how do we get it into the hands of people that need it the most? Yeah,
absolutely. And doing research for Q History 101, I found all these things out. I'm like, I had no idea that this existed. And even for doing research for this episode, I was stumbling across all these amazing resources that it's like we're shooting ourselves in the foot by not making this available to everybody in all of our platforms. And I think that is a great thing, that maybe we can work together in creating a platform that we have all of these resources available for people to access.
We talk about, if we don't share our history and use our resources, it's forgotten. And I'll give you an example. There's a wonderful book I used to use in the classes I would teach for LGBTQ history by Neil Miller, called Out of the Past. that book's no longer in circulation. And it has our history from the 1800s to today here in America. So what are we doing to preserve those pieces, those researchers that are doing the work, that are getting the history out there? I think that's an important piece. And we've got to work together to make sure that our stories and our history isn't being erased.
Right, and I think also it's really important, whatever good history has happened, it happened because people took a chance. They were brave. They came out, and they, we look at Florida history, and in the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s, there was something called the Johns Committee. And teachers in Florida were, in the university system, they were forced deep into the closet for fear of either being fired or arrested. And the state legislature...
Many were.
Many were.
Many were.
And there were many people who killed themselves because people had turned in their names in the state university system. And this was not that long ago. And, we look to today, where now we talk about teachers being afraid that they'll lose their teaching certificates. And perhaps some of them might. But you have to kind of weigh to yourself, would you prefer to stay in the closet, to not let your students know, to bury that part of your life, which is what's wanted by the people who've enforced these laws? They want you back in the closet. Are you prepared to live your life that way? Or is it more important to you to live your life as a Dr. Vega, or the other teachers that we knew along the way who were not afraid, who then risked their jobs, risked their careers, simply by being who they were, by having a picture on the desk of the person that they loved?
Yeah.
And not even the people who, were the advisors to, GSAs, but the people who just lived their lives, or they put a safe space sticker on the wall in their office. And these people were brave then, and they're going to be brave now.
Yeah.
And, choices will be made.
Yeah. And that really speaks to the founding of Safe Schools was that. It was educators that were fed up with what was happening and got together in houses doing these little wine meetings, just trying to figure out how can we create a safe space, not just for our students, but for ourselves as well. How can we fight against the discrimination that it was really a leftover from the Anita Bryant campaigns here in Miami-Dade? How can we fight to reverse that? And Safe Schools was birthed out of that need for educators to not just be able to teach and be themselves, but also to protect LGBTQ plus kids, or kids that are perceived to be LGBTQ plus. So it's really creating a safe space for all. And we, as a Safe Schools, as a legacy nonprofit in Miami, we are so grateful to the vision of our founder, Robert Lupo, because he really put himself out there. And he did this after a traumatic event. He was stabbed walking in the Miami Beach at night with his partner. He was stabbed by a gang of kids that just had an issue with them. And him surviving that led him to feel like it's one of those traumatic events that you have post-traumatic growth. He's like, I'm just gonna do this. This is what I need to do for myself and for other educators and for the kids, because I don't want anybody to feel the same way that I felt or go through what I went through.
I know Robert, and he and Etta Chimino and these other teachers, they put their necks on the chopping block.
Yep.
Just as they're being asked to today. And when you talk about not knowing your history, I think many of these younger teachers didn't understand the history either. And, I wish I could say that it would end just the way it is right now. But if you remember that when the Don't Say Gay law began, it was K through 3.
Right.
And within a year or two, suddenly it was the entire school system. And, yes, today they say you can be challenged, you could lose your certificate if you talk about it. But at what point might they say, you lose your certificate just because you are?
Yeah.
And that's the fear.
Yeah.
And, it won't matter whether you said it or not, you may still end up losing your job if somehow they decide. Like it used to be that you weren't a fit individual to be a teacher.
Right.
Or now, even for calling a student their preferred name, you could get your license removed.
Yeah.
Oh,
And it's
sure.
so enraging how this happens.
I think another thing, just to go off of what you were talking about, like what I was saying earlier on, I said that I'm talking to GSAs, I'm going to these classrooms. And again, I understand the concern from some of these people, but I also agree, like, well, somebody has to be the one to stand up against this pushback.
Yeah.
Because it's not fair to these kids, because you're pushing them back into the closet, and you're going to start pushing then the adults back into the closet, you know? And that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Like, we're out, and we're not going back.
Yeah.
That
You
may
know?
be, but until you get to that point, there's going to be a lot of pushback.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there needs to be a plan that if they decide next year, you can't have a GSA anymore in school. What is your plan?
Yeah, and I think that because Safe Schools was filled with educators, we were the first ones to really sound the alarm when Don't Say Gay was even coming out. Because Secretary Scott Galvin was saying that this is not going to be kept to elementary school. This is going to be expanded. There is fine print in that law that said it was going to be expanded. So we got everybody together and we started doing rallies and we started really like protesting this, not because we, the law itself is so vague, and that was the main problem, is the vagueness of the law. So people don't know how, educators have a million things to do to not have to go in there and try to figure out like what this law says, like if they can and cannot get in trouble. And that is why it is so important for organizations like Safe Schools to come in and not just sound the alarm, but also say like, we have to stand up. This is not okay. This is something that we have to really fight so that teachers are not censored, so that our history is not censored, and so that kids can continue and will continue to see themselves in the pages of the books.
Artemis, can you tell us what it's like in school now? What a history class is like? Have you seen a change since Don't Say Gay?
It's kind of terrifying now because a lot of teachers that used to be like openly supportive now have to like not be as supportive, like not openly supportive. I know now I don't get called my preferred name. I get called by my last name for teachers because, again, you can't call a student something that's not their legal name.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to explain it well, but it's just like a constant feeling of terror and anxiety that every time I go into school, it fills me with that feeling.
Yes, it's terrible. And Dr. Vega, what's it like on the college campus?
Well, I think the University of Miami is a little different than perhaps some of the other institutions. We do have a very strong community that's made up of multiple different student groups. There's a faculty staff group. We have an alumni group that's extremely active. So there's been a lot of support I think students will have found on our campus. But we get students from other places that are asking questions. What's happening in Florida has had an impact, I think, on students coming to the U because we happen to be in Florida and there's that fear given the current legislation and stuff. I've had conversations with parents about, how safe will my child be if I send them to your institution? And I can certainly speak about the U, but again, we're sort of insular to what's happening out in Miami. I can't speak for the rest of the city or the state. So I try to be very frank with them, but I will say it has impacted, I think, students' decisions whether they choose to come to Florida or not.
And teachers, I would think the same thing.
Teachers, the same thing. I think that's also very true. So it's we're doing the best we can to sort of be there and support our students in the best way possible and provide resources. But again, we're one institution, a private institution.
Sure.
I'm sure it may be very different for my colleagues at other public institutions.
Well, I mean, we're seeing that how difficult it is to find qualified teachers right here in Miami-Dade County. And, there was a story in the Miami Herald a few days ago that they've lowered requirements now so that you need a GED to be a substitute teacher in Miami-Dade schools. And why is that? Why is it that they're having such trouble? Now, there are other reasons too. The economy, the cost of housing, how much it costs to rent an apartment. Yeah, all of these things. But now we have another layer. and that is this either a safe place for someone to want to come to be a teacher? And and if it's not that it's a safe place, is it just a place you want to be?
Yeah.
Do you want to put yourself in this situation where, if you are out, that you suddenly have to go back in? I mean, it's just another layer.
Yes. It's a very complicated situation, and I think it speaks to having the right tools. It can make a huge difference in our school communities. And Safe Schools has one of the most dynamic video integration strategies in America to combat what we're watching in Florida. These programs are educational and entertaining for educators, students, and parents. Rainbow Roundtable is just one example. Another example is our weekly program, The Tea with Eddie.
Hey there, fabulous friends. Welcome to The Tea with Eddie. We're here to keep it queer, keep it real, and keep you informed about the latest in politics, pop culture, and everything in between. Every episode will dive deep into the heart of today's hottest topics, cover some of South Florida's hottest queer events, and serve you insights you won't find anywhere else. All from our unapologetically queer perspective. And of course, we'll be joined by some fabulous guests who will share their wisdom, wit, and stories with us. So whether we're discussing hard-hitting political issues, celebrating our favorite pop culture icons, or simply spilling the tea on the latest scandals, you can count on us to give you the lowdown with a side of sass. Now grab your favorite teacup, get comfy, and let's start spilling. Here's what we've got brewing for you today on The Tea with Eddie.
So we don't have Eddie with us here today, but we do have Harold, COO of Safe Schools. So Harold, can you tell us a little bit more about The Tea with Eddie?
Sure. So the Tea with Eddie is all about going deeper into some of the subjects that we want to cover. So as Tiffany was saying, Tiffany explains it as more like that after-school special. It's a feel-good, just finding queer elements in different aspects of popular culture. The Tea with Eddie is more precise. It goes deeper into certain subjects. It talks about broader subjects. One of the ones that I'm really proud of is we did something on our nation's motto, which is our original motto, which is E pluribus unum, which means out of many, one. And we spoke about different aspects of our democracy. What makes us special? Why is diversity so important? So it's you talked about queer theory, and it's finding queerness in spaces that people wouldn't really look at. It's finding the intersectionality that exists in the entirety of who we are. It's finding these moments of people shining and being their true self, and how that has impacted our democracy, has impacted our nation, has impacted the West, has impacted the world. And that is what the Tea with Eddie is all about. It's finding those moments. It's being unapologetically queer. It's just really like going deep into different aspects of our history and our culture as well.
Absolutely. And Tiffany, you spend a lot of time with Eddie. What's he like?
He's just a really fun guy. He's really great at the content creation. And I was kind of surprised when Harold had asked me. He's like, "Hey, do you want to join our team?" And I was like, I saw some bits of Eddie's, and I was like, "You already have everything you need." But sure, if you want some extra flair, I'll join.
That's awesome. Well, check out The Tea with Eddie on Safe Schools' social media pages. So moving on, we're going to consider what the future holds for the LGBTQ plus community. Let's gaze into the horizon and discuss the challenges and opportunities ahead in our future outlook. As we gaze into the horizon with our future outlook segment, it's essential to recognize that while history provides us with lessons and milestones, the journey for the LGBTQ plus community is far from over. The challenges faced by the community, especially our elders, are both pressing and poignant. By 2030, we anticipate that the number of LGBTQ plus adults over 50 will surge to around 7 million. Yet, as a society, we seem unprepared for this demographic shift. A staggering 1/3 of LGBTQ plus elders live at or below 200% of the federal poverty level. The fear of discrimination looms large, with many avoiding medical care or worrying about having to recloset themselves when seeking elder housing. Imagine an elder named Maria, who's lived her life openly as a lesbian. As she seeks housing in her golden years, she's confronted with the fear of having to hide her true self once again, all to ensure she has a safe place to live. Or consider James, who after years of fighting for acceptance, now fears he might outlive his savings, a concern shared by over half of LGBTQ plus elders. The emotional toll is evident. A significant number of LGBTQ plus elders grapple with loneliness, with over half concerned about the isolation that might come with age. This isolation can exacerbate mental health challenges, making them more pronounced than those faced by their heterosexual peers. And as we navigate the present, echoes of the past reverberate. The recent surge in legislative and political attacks in 2022, coupled with the concerns about the potential rollback of marriage equality rights, are stark reminders of battles fought and won. The handling of the recent monkeypox outbreak has evoked painful memories of the AIDS epidemic's stigmatization. But in this journey forward, it's crucial to remember that our community's history is diverse. While white cisgender gay men have undoubtedly played pivotal roles, the contributions of people of color, transgender individuals, and queer women have been monumental. Often, those at the intersections of race and gender, facing the brunt of discrimination, have been at the forefront of change. So my panelists, considering the challenges and the rich tapestry of our community's history, how can we ensure that our future strategies are intersectional, addressing the unique needs and challenges of every member of the LGBTQ plus community, particularly between generations?
I'll just jump in really quickly.
Go for it.
What you had mentioned earlier about, passing that history on, because, as of right now, they're not talking about queer history right now. And it's true, you weren't really brought up that conversation if nobody in the family or someone that you knew was queer. So you had to go look for it. You had to go out into the community. And I think the only way to preserve something as our history is, again, to talk. And, it's how I've explained it to my kids when I go to talk to them and the GSAs. I want this to be like a baton race. I have the baton and I'm passing it on to you and you'll pass it on to the next one, and that's how a legacy continues, and we're only here for such a short time. And so the only thing that does stay behind is a legacy, is the cause of fighting against for what's right, And I think that's so important. And I think the youth right now are doing a great job. And I definitely would encourage, and I've heard this a lot from a lot of elder LGBTQ plus individuals. They're like, well, nobody wants to see us, they want to see the kids. And I'm like, yes, but you are just as important.
Right.
They're elders. These kids, they don't have the same knowledge as you do. They don't know what life was when everyone was majority in the closet, or to have, again, somebody who was in a long-term relationship that was, same sex. And so to them, it's more normalized now, but they need to know and remember that it wasn't like that. And it's such a privilege that we get to have those things now. And then everybody's story is important. The young, the old, and in the in-between,
Tiffany, you're definitely spot on with that. And I think for us, it's how do we create those spaces? Yeah. We've worked really closely with Lambda Living, which is run by our dear friend Cindy Brown. And at the U, we've done cross-generational conversations. And I think finding spaces for us to have those with our high schools and our students, have those cross-generational conversations. I think those are important. Creating ways that are helpful to both parties, or the people that are learning in the situation. When I was over at FIU, we had a mentors program, and our mentor program partnered with Lambda Living to help move some of their elderly into the first sort of space, home that they had acquired, apartments. And that day was so beautiful because our students talked about how they felt they gained a grandparent that they never had, that they could talk to openly about who they were. And the same thing from, the elderly group were, indebted to the students who helped them move their information, but to talk to them and hear their stories. So I think we have to do a better job of finding spaces and avenues for us to have these conversations.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's so important, and I tell this to a lot of my friends, that my favorite thing to do when I go on a cruise is find an elderly gay couple and just talk to them. or an elderly LGBT couple, doesn't matter what it is. I just want to talk to them because I want to understand their history. I want to hear their experiences. I want to sit at their feet and just be like, tell me how it was. I just want to get to know you. And I feel like in our community, there's so much, and this isn't upon every community, but I think that particularly in the LGBT community, there's so much ageism that happens that people don't want to do that cross-generational conversation. And I encourage all young queer people and legacy queer people to break down that stigmatization, break down that barrier, and just take the risk to talk to somebody. Because you will learn so much from a cross-generational perspective, and it really does become even more important for us as queer people because we don't have the traditional family, system set up for us.
Right.
So many of these older queer individuals that exist, they don't have the same support structures that you would with a built-in family. That's why it's important for us to create these chosen families and just for us to just reach out. That's why I love Land of Living with what they do, because they do create that space for that cross-generational connection, which is very important.
But you also need to go beyond our community and have allies in other communities. When you talk about intersectionality, you need to be able to go to, affirming churches and synagogues and other social groups and civic groups, and where you're going to find these allies and say, we need to be able to work with you to provide, if we can't do it in our own schools, where else can we provide for students to get this information, to feel safe after school? I mean, and there are places to go, and it's responsibility of groups like Safe Schools to be able to have other venues for people to be able to go and get that information, and then also to be with people who are not necessarily queer, who will be affirming also, to let them know that the world is a safe space for them. Not only some spaces are not safe.
Yeah, and it was my time at Coral Gables Congregational United Church of Christ that I was exposed to a variety of cross-generational perspective on queer individuals. And I remember this one time we had a Christmas party at these two people that I call them my gay moms, because they really were just there. They're pivotal people in my upbringing and when I was coming out. And I met these two women who have been together for, how many, Eileen and Ingrid, are like
47 years.
47 years. And I was like, it was like when the kids met you, I just sat down. I'm like, I want to know everything about you, about your history, your struggles, just how this has happened. And then I was at their wedding. They got married at the church, and it was a small wedding, but I was there, and it was such, I cannot explain how much that impacted me, and it just gave me so much hope. And it was at that a queer affirming church, and that's why it's so important, like you said, to find these queer affirming spaces, and they exist. There are queer affirming synagogues, there are queer affirming churches, there are queer affirming groups all over the city, all over the United States that you can go and find people, and it really does change your life.
I want to jump in a second because I know that churches have done a lot of harm to our community and to our youth, and some are in trauma, and that's understandable. They don't want to go by a church. But I think it's also important to send the message that there are places that are affirming and welcoming and will accept you just as you are. When I was coming out, I was struggling with that, and I had gone to a deacon, I'll never forget his name, John Paul Cafiero, and what he shared with me was pivotal, and it changed my whole perspective on spirituality and religion. He said, Gisela, God created you exactly how he intended you to be. So clearly there's a narrative that churches are bad, that churches will crucify you. And yes, some will. But in order to do some of that healing, find the places that are helpful. Remember, there's 3 things that helped us develop: our community, our family, and our peers. Our community, well, churches, schools, and whatever other groups you may be a part of. So they play an important role.
So they do.
And for those who have relationships with LGBTQ plus elders, have you heard any concerns that they have for the youth of today's generation? Things that they're worried about?
I'll share one conversation we had at our cross-generational meeting that we had, and it was about this notion of fragility that our youth have today, that, they don't want to get hurt, they're afraid that somebody's going to hurt them. They need to hear the narratives of our older generations, mine included, that we were scared, we were hurt, people were dying, our friends were dying. So what you're experiencing has also been experienced by this population. I think that's a story that we're not sharing, and I think that it might help our youth know that they're not alone in this.
Right. I think that we were earlier talking about Tyler Clementi, who was, a 20-something student at Rutgers who killed himself, threw himself off the George Washington Bridge in 2010 because he was outed by his roommate, who did a video of him, being intimate with a partner, and then put it online. And this, within hours of happening, Tyler Clementi walked to the George Washington Bridge and threw himself over. And, in that era, in the mid-2000s into the mid-2015s, I think we heard a lot about it gets better. And, there was this discussion about, youth suicide. And my concern at the time was that we were actually normalizing the idea that this was an option for young people. That we were talking about it in a way in which, yes, this is something that kids do because, their lives are hard and this and that it was, for some people, an option. And I really had problems with that because there have always been, young people, for whatever reason, who, their lives were at risk. But, I'm not comfortable, I'll just say that, with the notion of making it acceptable as an option for young people. And, yes, deal with it. And there needs to be resources for kids who are on the edge of doing something. But we're stronger than that, many of us, most of us, because you look around and, there were not waves of suicides through the generations. There just weren't. Kids were always bullied. And they were always kicked out of their homes and all the things that happened. And I'm not minimizing it. I'm not saying it was easy. But we're resilient and we're strong. And that's what we should be emphasizing. And that's what you were saying. And that's why, when we talk about this, I think it's really important for us to say, yeah, it gets better, but it gets better because of who you are. And just, you are resilient, right. And you will survive this, and you'll thrive.
Yeah.
And it won't be easy.
And such a contributing factor to suicidal ideation, suicidal attempts, completions, is profound sense of hopelessness. And I think, to Dr. Vega's point and cross-generational mentorships, having elders impart a sense of hope, having the youth be told that, I understand you. I've been through something, it's maybe different, but I've been through something similar, and this is how I dealt with it. It can make a profound impact on the youth.
Right. You can have a relationship.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can have a career. And what we've been able to show in the last 15 or 20 years is that you can have it all successfully.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's also an important aspect of this is that what's happening now in Florida is that we're seeing a brain drain in the queer community as queer people pack up and leave. And I understand that people are scared, and I hear this all the time. People are scared. But at the same time, I respect people's decisions. I'm not saying that is wrong. If you feel like you have to pack up your bags and go, then that is your choice. You have made a choice, and I support you. I just wish that more people would just stay and not fight the good fight, but just show up and be you in the spaces that you inhabit, because that's the only way that we are going to change it. And if you brain drain, if you leave Florida's going to get worse and worse and worse. And that is, that's what scares me, is people leaving and not people staying here to show themselves, to be themselves. As Harvey Milk said, we have to come out. We have to be ourselves.
I think to piggyback off of what you just said, that's something that I've talked to friends who are part of the community, and that same thing. They're like, oh, I might leave, and I'm like, again, I respect if that's what you feel like is the best option for you, then do it. If you can, then and you have the means, the funds to do it, then do it. But there's a lot of queer youth that don't have that option, that don't have those facilities, and they're going to be left on their own if you leave. And I know it's again, when I think about it, it's almost kind of like a hero story. Like, you have to be there. Like, who's going to stand up for them if no one does?
Right.
You know?
Where do you go?
Yeah.
And then what? I mean,
We had that conversation, Steve and I had a conversation earlier that people choose to leave, but what's happening is that Florida has become sort of ground zero to what we're seeing sort of happen across the nation
Right.
now. So you can leave, but eventually it's going to catch up with you.
Yeah.
So that's something to think about too, that doesn't mean you're safe just going somewhere else.
Right.
Yeah.
So given everything that's going on locally, nationally, what can we do to support our queer youth?
I think, honestly, and this is I feel like I really have a pulse onto the young generation, because that's something I ask them every time I see them. And it's quite interesting to see their reaction, because they're kind of like surprised. They're like, oh, but you're an organization. I'm like, yeah, but I want to hear from your mouths. What is it that you need? What are the resources? Like, tell me so I can do everything in my power to talk to my higher ups and be like, hey, this is what they need, and we need to like get on it, you know? And I really want to create this sense of like familial, like family kind of feeling, because at the end of the day, we are community, and community is not one person. It's not just one group of people. It's essentially a very large family, you know?
Yeah.
And we may argue, we may not see eye to eye at times, but we all have the same wants for each other. We all want you to be successful, to find love, to have, you know, a successful career, to live a long life. And, you know, whatever that may be, whether you're single or whether you want a committed relationship, or maybe down the line you want to have children, and whatever that may look like for you. And I'm trying to break the gap of organization and people. I'm like, it's great to know that your organization is popular, or like people know it, but is it really helping the deep roots of the community?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I
And
was just going to say, I think that's absolutely true. And part of it is you need to get out there and go talk to these organizations and talk to students. And I'm really interested in what our
Yes.
youth has to say, because we could say this is what they need, but the reality is we need to talk to young people to find out what is it they need. What would you say?
I think something that would really help is like, now that GSAs are under attack, keeping GSAs at safe spaces, because that's where you may find your chosen family, especially in queer communities, where we have our chosen family, which is a very important part of our life. You find people who understand you, who look like you, who are like you, and you feel seen by those people. So I think that really creating and maintaining those spaces would be really helpful for little queer kids out there that may need it.
Yeah.
And there's something I would like to also say, and that is, if you're an older person, and I don't mean old, but older, to be respectful of the young person that you're mentoring, and to remember that you're there to help them and create a safe space.
Right.
And to not do anything or say anything to these people which will make them feel that they're in an unsafe space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my mission with, when I started Safe Schools, I realized that I stepped into a organization and a space that I had some influence. And what I did, what I thought to myself is like, okay, I'm gonna go and tap into my inner child and see what did I want to see? What would I have wanted to see in the schools, in media, in the things that I had access to on the internet, and produce that. And because now that I'm in a position of influence like that, I can do something about it. I can be that change that I wanted to see in my life. And that's part of our programming. Our programming is mainly like, it's not even about talking about, the obvious queer elements in pop culture or in our society, but talking about the elements that resonated with me as a child. You know, we covered things from Star Trek to Beast Wars, Transformers, some anime series, and on all those, there are queer elements that aren't really. It's not the main point. It's not the main thing, but they're there. So I want to highlight those. Now that I have the ability to do it, I want to highlight that and try to bring more connections with that.
I think it really speaks to an important point that every generation has different needs, and for those in the helping position, we need to listen.
Yeah.
Have open ears, open minds, and ask, what do you want and how can we be of help?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But moving on, the future is a canvas painted with our collective hopes and actions. And as we draw this week's Rainbow Roundtable to a close, I'd like to take a moment to express my heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed panelists. Journalist, pop culture influencer, university educator, student, and LGBTQ+ youth organization advocate. Your insights, experiences, and dedication to the cause have enriched our discussions and provided invaluable perspectives to our viewers. To our audience, thank you for joining us on this enlightening journey. If today's discussion resonated with you, I encourage you to delve deeper into our mission for safe schools. Our commitment is unwavering to protect, educate, and uplift queer youth, educators, and the diverse tapestry of modern families that make up our great nation. But we cannot do it alone. By subscribing to our channel, you stay informed and connected with the latest discussions and initiatives. If you're moved to contribute further, consider donating or volunteering at our events. Your financial contributions and talents are the lifeblood of our organization, enabling us to continue our vital work. A special thank you goes out to our generous sponsors, without whom our endeavors would not be possible. The Quadrachi Cabrera Family Foundation, your unwavering support has been instrumental. To the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, your dedication to health and advocacy is truly commendable. The Children's Trust of Miami, your commitment to the well-being of our youth is deeply appreciated. And of course, our partners at Happening Out Television Networks, thank you for amplifying our voice and message. Hotspots Magazine Happening Out Television Network is a nonprofit 501c3 in the same model of PBS and NPR. They are the only LGBTQ+ television streaming platform in the world on Roku and Apple TV. And their mission is to support their 10 pillars of the LGBTQ+ community, which include Black LGBTQ+, Latino, trans, lesbian and queer women, seniors, LGBTQ+ business, HIV/AIDS, LGBTQ+ healthcare, faith, social justice, and the deep commitment to the pillar of students and youth. Together with your support and the dedication of our community, we can create a brighter, more inclusive future for all. So until next time, stay informed, stay passionate, and remember, in diversity there's understanding, in understanding there's unity, and in unity there's hope. I'll see you next time.